just a quick book placement, product placement for my books under the author name Derek Hemingway. First, we have the first installment in the Human Saga, which is my epic trilogy of novellas about a future civilization of corporate fascism that is being invaded by an alien cult. We have The Mortician's Daughter, a dark fantasy set in Mesoamerica about a sorceress who blocks out the sun to create a kingdom of darkness and evil, full of ghosts and monsters. It's fucking awesome. Part 2 of the Human Saga, and then part 3. There's currently my first full-length novel in the works, so be on the lookout for that. That's about all. That heathen bastard! Hello everyone, welcome back to That Heathen Bastard, a platform for talking points and not a news show. Welcome back everyone once again, and today we are going to continue broaching some topics regarding LGB representation and a conservative approach. Now, I've already discussed in a previous video why the progressive approach, and excuse me for the belch by the way, why the progressive approach is actually really fucking terrible and sows division. You should totally watch that. I make my point very clear in that. Now, I want to, of course, discuss the concept of LGB conservatism. With that being said, let us begin on discussing multiple approaches to problems. Of course, problems have multiple approaches. Don't be ridiculous. There has to be at least 1,000,001 approaches to say on how to disarm a bomb, or how to consume a meal. One culture says you can eat your food with a fork. Another culture says you can eat your food with the chopsticks. So, of course, there's multiple approaches. Anyone who says that their approach is the ultimate approach to anything, or that there's only one approach, their approach, you should take that shit with an absolute grain of salt. And maybe treat them as a joke, because that is kind of a joke in its own way. Suffice to say, when there are multiple approaches, you want to be ready and prepared. You don't want to be the guy in the situation who, you gotta do something but you don't know how to do it, right? You gotta be able to understand how to do multiple things, possibly in multiple ways, and be extremely useful either to yourself or others. That being said, there is, of course, the known left-wing approach. The left-wing approach coming from a mindset of criticalness, that you are critical of society. Your thoughts on society are largely negative. Society's bad. Oh, woe is me. Oh, woe is us. Oh, woe is them. Society sucks and we must change it. Therefore, the left-wing approach is either creating new legislation, expanding legislation, or changing old legislation. Making sweeping reforms, causing eventual widespread transformation. They are progress versus they are change versus tradition. Progress versus more of the same. As a result, this generally means that they are oftentimes against the spirit or the letter of the law if they feel the law is not fair enough in their eyes. They can be frequently anti-tradition. Many left-wingers are atheist or irreligious, although certainly not all. Many look for alternatives to Christianity because they associate Christianity with the right wing. For example, you get a general idea that they have to change, and change again. Everything is change. Whereas the right-wing approach to a general problem is learning the system inside and out, knowing what rights and protections and guarantees you have, and using those to your maximal ability and to your maximal advantage. I.e., the Constitution says all men are created equal, therefore you are created equal if you are indeed created by anything. It literally says that everyone has the guaranteed rights within the Bill of Rights. It also guarantees certain protections. Not only that, you have laws which protect you. You have Title IX if you're a racial minority. You have other protections. I believe they were either talking about or actually did go so far as to expand Title IX to include people who were LGB or LGBT, depending on your preferred term, whether you include or either include or exclude transgenderism. So you have that approach, knowing the system inside and out and using it to your advantage. Now, of course, there are cross purposes and loyalties. There are people on the right wing who hate you if you're LGBT. There are people on the left wing who are closet bigots who hate you but don't actually want to say anything about it because they're just in it to use you for their own ends. Then there are those people who genuinely support you. And just to be clear, in my experience, most of the people who are genuinely supportive of LGBT or LGBT rights are actually fairly close to the center. If you are solidly right or solidly left or far right, then the support will either be largely fake or not at all. At least that's from my point of view or my perspective on the issue. I have not seen much genuine support from the extremes. And there's always some cross purpose. If it's far left, they want you for Marxism. If it's for right wing, they just want you to vote Republican. It's always the same shit. There's always some ulterior motive behind it. We cannot have cross purposes and loyalties because it sows division and creates turncoats. Now, obviously, the issue comes from particularly the realm of pseudoscience, being that the current division with the LGBT community is the T. That being said, that comes from transgenderism, and of course, the pseudoscience is pushed by the left. And if you're not familiar, pseudoscience is, of course, the realm of sciences that, or quote sciences, methodologies, we'll say methodologies that reject certain elements of the scientific method because they're not interested in actually arriving at the truth, just getting what they want. And if the scientific method or certain elements of the scientific method gets in the way of getting what they want, they create pseudosciences. Fake sciences that on the outside appear like the real thing, but if you look on the inside and are familiar with the real scientific method, it becomes very obvious that this shit is fake. And the left does push pseudosciences all the time. Now, obviously, transgenderism and gender theory being a fake science that essentially that there's biological sex, and then there's this other you that they call gender, this other self that is a higher form of expression. It's almost Gnostic in a way, this idea that secret knowledge will awaken a higher self and give you transcendence from the flesh. Gender absolutely transcends the concept of biological sex and the concept of the flesh. That is actually very Gnostic. In fact, if you look into wokeism in general, it all gets very Gnostic and may actually have roots with Hegel, a neo-Marxist philosopher who thought that there was the critical consciousness, which is a true higher self, and the bourgeois consciousness, which is forced on you by the bourgeoisie, and that engaging properly with his ideology somehow awakens the true self. It's basically the same thing. Gender theory shows you that there's a true higher self called gender, and that awakening it may reveal that you're actually female, even if your body says you're male. This is a pseudoscience because it rejects one of the major tenets of the scientific method, which is the method of empirical evidence. That when you make a claim, you have the burden of proof and must carry it. They claim, for example, that someone can identify as the opposite sex by identifying having the female gender, whatever that's supposed to be. And when pressured for evidence of gender's existence, they present a lot of stuff that on the surface appears related to gender, but in reality has very little, if anything at all, to do with the concept of gender. Alternatively, they may spit and sputter and provide no evidence at all because they find, holy shit, I've just been regurgitating lines. I don't know what I'm talking about. I can't provide evidence. For evidence of gender, they will provide things like a man behaving in a slightly more feminine way, or a woman behaving in a slightly more masculine way, and that is somehow proof that gender exists, that people's behavior proves gender. This precludes that they think that male and female have set or prescribed behaviors that are inherent in that gender. And so if you behave in a way not consistent with that, that means you're really the opposite gender or closer to that opposite gender in some way. And then it becomes a spectrum of from male to female, with male on the left and female on the right, and you're somewhere along the way to the other. And oftentimes what I've noticed is that the genders they create along the way, the 7 million Tumblr genders, really actually correlate with the personality types associated in Jungian psychology, which are typically a formulation of dominant uh, cognitive functions of the mind, each assigned a letter, like cognitive is assigned to C, or logic is assigned to L, or something of that nature. And then the combination of 4 letters identifies your 4 primary dominant cognitive functions. Like for mine, it's INTJ, intuit, natural, thinking, and judging. And a lot of the time, this is misidentified as a gender because they can sometimes incorporate elements that are more feminine, like intuit. Intuition is generally more associated with women. We don't think of men as being intuitive, which is a hilarious notion if you think about it, because men experience intuition all the time. It just relates to different things, i.e., male intuition relates to being able to make an educated guess as to the immediate future, or being able to understand what someone's motives is by reading their language or reading their actions, or seemingly knowing where to find something you need. Like if you need water, you'll be like, I know where water is, follow me. Right? That's sort of the male intuitive function. So it's actually universal. And this may not be all how they do it, but ultimately there is no real proof of gender, so it cannot be scientific because it defies empirical evidence. Because gender is not an object, just like you cannot prove God because God is a unpresentable, he's unfalsifiable, and so is gender. That means you can literally make something up and it'll be unfalsifiable. So gender could be made up, and I personally think it is. It is a misunderstanding of the spectrum, the true spectrum of male and female behavior. Some things are male specific, some things are female specific, but both sexes exhibit all or most of the same characteristics, just to different degrees. What we call feminine traits are actually oftentimes universal traits that are just more common for one than the other. Within the realm of psychology, this is understood, but within the realm of gender theory, this is not understood because they reject the empirical and focus on this misunderstanding of personally expressed ideas and this Gnostic notion that there's a true higher self that is awakened through special knowledge, which is gender theory. And this was introduced on top of what they call gender dysphoria, which is really gender confusion or a syndrome where the person doesn't fully identify with their biological sex due to some kind of underlying unknown mental factor of illness. A syndrome being a condition without an identifiable cause, like Asperger's syndrome, for example. By the way, so suffice to say, that's why it's called a syndrome. We don't know the cause. Gender confusion syndrome, that's more of a colloquial phrase. I don't remember the proper term at the moment. Has gender theory layered on top of it, and it becomes gender dysphoria. You are confused. You are a female who believes you're male. You say, well, I feel male. Like, but you've never been a male to know what being male feels like. So how do you feel male? You don't feel male, you're just confused. There you go. I just used the Socratic method to reduce the concept to an absurdity. See how easy this is? When you use logic, you can literally tear the leftist ideology a new one. Because their ideology is not based on facts and logic, it is based on feelings and narrative, which unfortunately is how human action has been driven for most of human history, sadly enough. Now, that was a very long diatribe. I hope you were fascinated by that, otherwise, I just bored the hell out of you. Now, I wanted to talk about the LGB Alliance. This is a new splinter movement due to the division. We splintered off, and this splinter group, LGB Alliance, rejects transgenderism, treating it as a separate issue. They have such rhetorical statements as sex, not gender, meaning they want to refocus on sexual orientation and not have all this focus on genderism. And really, it's because they always support the current thing. Whatever's current, that's what they support. And transgenders, if you're listening, guess what? As soon as you're not the current thing, the leftists are going to abandon you like weak old garbage like they did us. First, it was gay men. Then once they were no longer the hip thing, they got abandoned. Then it was bisexuals, mostly women. Bisexual women and lesbians. Bisexual men like me were never the thing. We were never the thing. Ah! Suffice to say, once you're no longer the hip thing, dust. They won't give a shit. That's how they are. They don't have any morals, only what is politically convenient for them at the time. Come to the right wing. At least we have actual morals and are actually consistent. The left has changed so wildly, but the right wing narrative has remained roughly the same for 40 years. Balance the budget, pay the debt, restore the former greatness of the American economy before it was ruined by the national debt started by Lyndon Baines Johnson. Guarantee equal rights for all people as long as they are equal, etc., etc. It has not changed. It's the same. The approach may have changed to the issue, but the issue itself is consistent. That being said, the LGB Alliance is not exactly right-wing. I think it's actually quite left-wing, actually, left of center. So it's not exactly conservative, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. They reject gender theory and are refocused on sexual orientation. They actually see to the issues of lesbian, gays, and bisexuals. They are not turncoats who do what is popular. They're consistent and they stick to their guns. They have this argument that transgenderism is a form of conversion therapy. Someone who would otherwise grow up gay being encouraged to transition. I believe that is one of their talking points. It's often been an earmark or supposed earmark that someone is gay or bisexual, that their behavior is not entirely consistent with their biological sex's general behavior. Like maybe you're a little more feminine, right? Like, you watch TV shows, they're a little more girly, or you play with dolls, something like that. You know. So they say that's an earmark that kid is gay. That's actually kind of unintelligent, because I actually used to work for him. Even my mother used to work for this guy named George Higbee. Shout out to George, who does have a fairly feminine, not entirely masculine body language and voice and attitude. But the dude is actually straight as a nail and straight as a dime. He's as straight as a pencil. What's even funny is I know a gay man named Troy Hodling. Shout out to Troy if he's watching. Who is gay but behaves very masculine. So how is that an earmark? Is what I would ask of the LGB Alliance. How is that an earmark? I don't understand the talking point. Like, I'm not going to support your alliance until I understand you more fully. I may even start my own movement at some point. The thought has occurred to me. But the LGB Alliance is a character showing how people truly feel betrayed by the inclusion of this Gnostic gender theory and how sexual orientation has been kind of dismissed as unimportant. Right? So, honestly, it has just caused me to hate the left more than I already do. This is what I'm going to admit. I will admit this. I'm not going to lie. I do hate the left. I see so much immorality from their end of the spectrum. It is not even funny. I'm sick to death of it. I am absolutely sick. And generally speaking, I despise them. They are everything wrong with the world in so many ways. I try to be reasonable. I try to see their worldview. I try to see their perspective. But if you're a leftist, I'm all I see is just trash. Trash from your mouth, trash in your brain, trash in your life. I see just your regular garden variety progressive, and I see some principle there. I think their insistence on always changing things is a little naive and foolish, or their insistence on mixed economies or socialism as ignorant. But if you compare a regular garden variety progressive Democrat to a full on leftist, it's like, it's night and day. I can get along with progressives easily enough. They got principle. But leftists have none. And I reject their support. Don't be a Marxist. You can at least be a social capitalist. You can at least support mixed economies. I'm still mostly okay with that. Although, depending on how I feel after the end of my journey into economics, I might not. But at the end of the day, the left really does despise people who reject them. Okay? They despise you if you reject them because they have absolute loyalty to their ideology. Absolute 100% adherence, no allowance for disagreement. They are extremely dogmatic, and it is very much like a secular religion. And if you take a religious studies approach, boy, do they look like Gnosticism. Holy shit. Special knowledge awakening the higher self. Uh, you've heard enough about that. They really do respect people who reject them. They despise you for not going along with the party line. And there are leftists in the Democratic Party, more and more disaffected liberals like, say, Tim Pool. Shout out to Tim Pool. Even though he's a bigger guy than me, I still want to shout him out anyway. Suffice to say, disaffected liberals are proof of the leftist presence within the party. Because that's what they're complaining about if you actually listen to them talk about the issue. I'm not a disaffected liberal. I was never a disaffected liberal. I would say that I was never really a Republican either. But yeah, that is how they are. At the end of the day, the world is about making choices. Life is about making choices. You make the choice, even if you're a determinist. You make the choice that makes sense. The thing you feel compelled to do. And many people who are possessed of logic and reason and like to use facts and logic will be compelled to make the choice of rejecting leftism. And if you are an LGB person who is otherwise a rationalist, you will reject them in time. It'll be very fast in coming. Because once you see just how irrational and emotionally driven and illogical these people are, And if you understand the history of irrationalism and how for thousands of years the irrational aspect of humanity drove things like witch trials and persecutions and false thinking and false ideas, you'll see rationalism as a far superior ideal. And once you aim for rationalism, embrace it, learn how to use logic, these people will look insane to you. They will look insane. And that is because they are insane. Whew! That was long, boy! Ha ha! Anyway, with that being said, there will be a link in the description below. Please buy, download, and read my books. And as always, choose peace. Please be sane from now on.